Bookish Babes, and welcome to the 12 Days of Vlogmas, Day 6. For those that are new around here, my name's Rainy. I teach music and I also read books. Thriller, horror, sci-fi, fantasy, romance, nonfiction, all the things. So if you like that sort of stuff, please like and subscribe to my channel down below so that you don't miss out on any of my content and it helps my channel grow. Like I said, we are in day 6 of the 12 Days of Vlogmas. If you've missed a day or two, I will link the playlist underneath here so that you can check out all of the good fun stuff we've been talking about. In today's video, I thought it would be fun to take a look at only the books that I've deemed worthy enough of 5 stars this year. And I don't remember the exact number, but I'm pretty sure it's like 50 something out of 107, which is like half of my reads. And yes, some of these, upon further reflection, maybe they aren't 5 stars necessarily anymore upon a reread, but in the moment they were 5 stars. So I'm going off of what I felt in that moment. I'm going to go month by month so that we can see which months had the best like reading for me, like which ones did really well, like 5-star wise, and then we'll just take it from there. So we're going to start with January, work our way through December. Let's see what books I gave 5 stars to this year. In January, I read 10 books and 6 of them were 5 stars. So that was a pretty good month. So I'm going to go in the order that I read them. And the first 5-star that I had for the year actually was Near the Bone by Christina Henry. And I'm not going to say what each of these books is about. I'm going to give you like a 1-sentence summary and that's it. Basically, it's a woman trapped on a mountain with her very abusive husband. And there's some creature lurking out in the woods or in the mountains. That's basically all this book is. And it was one of the first books that I annotated a little bit. And I just remember this being so fun. Like, you never really see the creature, but like you feel like the sheer terror of the creature regardless. It was such a good read. And I remember I loved it so much. I had so much fun with it. I read it super quick and it was a blast. So I'm very glad that this was my first 5-star read of the year. Then from there, we went a little more fantastical and I started I don't actually know what the name of this series is, but I started this series, the Every Heart a Doorway series by Seanan McGuire, and I only have the first book. I need to actually like get all of the books, but this is about Eleanor West's Home for Wayward Children. It's just a bunch of like children that lived in like different fantastical worlds, and they're basically sent to this place, like a Hogwarts type school, and some of the books follow the school, which this one does, and some of them follow the kids in their actual world, like one specific child in an actual world. And I had so much fun with this book. I really enjoyed it, and it definitely set up the world well, so I'm intrigued in reading the rest of the series for sure. Then we went for a fun time with one of my favorite authors, Miss Taylor Jenkins Reid, and we read Daisy Jones and the Six. I loved this book. It was literally like reading a book about Fleetwood Mac in like fiction, and I just loved it. I loved it so much. I loved everything about it. I loved the band atmosphere. I loved like the interviews in it. Like this book was so great. The audiobook was one of the best audiobooks I've ever listened to. They have a Netflix special or Hulu special coming out in March, and I cannot wait to binge that series. But this book was so fun. If you are a person that loves like 60s rock bands like Fleetwood Mac and stuff like that, you would really appreciate this book. So good. Then I did a reread of a classic because I was planning on rereading this entire series this year, and I didn't reread any after this first book, and that was Twilight by Miss Stephenie Meyer. And yes, it still hits as hard as it did when I was in high school. I still loved it just as much. Yes, the writing is crap. You don't read it for the writing. You read it for the love story. You read it for the vampires. You read it just because it's nostalgic. You're not reading it because it's good literature. And if you are and you think it's good literature, then let's chat because we need to show you some other better literature than this. But it was still 5 stars, and I still had so much time with it, or so much fun with it, and it is such a vibe. And why is this book so big? It is not because this is all Twilight. It's because I also have the 10-year anniversary Life and Death Twilight Reimagined, and I'm pretty sure, oh yeah, this is a fanfic about, instead of Bella and Edward, it's Beaufort and Edith. Yeah. Backwards. Then we have my favorite read of January, and that was when I started my high fantasy era, and I read Jade City by Fonda Lee as part of a read-along by Mel Reads. And I loved this book so much. It was my first high fantasy book that I've ever read, and I had so much fun with it. I just loved exploring this world and these characters, and Fonda just does a really good job with everything that she describes, except for sex scenes. But thank God there was only like one. And this book was just so good. I just can't say more about this book. If you want to read fantasy, but you're a little scared, I feel like this one is a good one. It's not too highly fantastical, but it is a little bit. So like the first 100 pages, you might feel like you don't know what's going on. But you know what? Just get through it because it gets good. And then the last 5-star that I had in January, which I don't know where my book went. I feel like my mom has my copy. I'm going to have to ask. Is It Happened One Summer by Tessa Bailey. And that is just a steamy rom-com about a, like an Alexis from Schitt's Creek basically moving to like this podunk town to help refurbish her old father's restaurant. And she falls in love with like a fisherman dude. And it's very steamy, very spicy. I loved it so much. I love Miss Tessa Bailey and her writing. She knows how to write steamy scenes for sure. So I definitely recommend it if you were going to check it out. But as I said, I read 6 out of 10 5-stars, and my favorite for January was Jade City. All right, let's move on to February. February, I only read 8 books, but 4 of them were 5 stars. So I had half of a successful month. And I'm going to go in the order that I read these as well. And so the first 5-star that I read in February was Reminders of Him by Colleen Hoover. This was her newest book about a young mother that fights to earn a place in her child's life after going to jail for something horrific, an accident that happened with an ex of hers. I don't know. I must have, like, the time that I read it, I had to read it really fast because I was doing a buddy read with a bunch of people and I hadn't read it in time. But I just loved everything about this. Now that I think back on it, there were definitely plot issues with it, and it probably was more of a 3.5 or a 4. But at the time that I read it, I absolutely loved it and I thought it was great. And so I'm going to keep sticking to it that it was 5 stars. But I had a blast with Ms. Coho in this one. Then we got to one of my favorite sequels and favorite series, cozy mystery series of all time, Finlay Donovan Knocks 'Em Dead by El Cosmano. A lot of people say this is not as good as the first one, but I beg to differ. I honestly loved this one just as much, with the witty banter between her and her babysitter, Vero. It is just such a good tag team dynamic. If you've never read this series, you should. It's about a woman that is a mystery writer or a thriller writer, and she is overheard one day talking about her next true crime novel, and the woman thinks that she is a hit woman and asks her to kill her husband, and stuff goes off from there. And it's just the best time ever. It's really, really funny. It's like a Thelma and Louise type detective situation between her and her babysitter as a tag team duo. So definitely check it out. The next 5-star that I read was the biggest book that I read this year, and that was Crescent City by Sarah J. Maas. And yes, I did read this in February to prepare for the new book, and I didn't read the new book. I don't know, I got intimidated or something. But I love this book clearly, as all of the tabs you can see. I don't feel like I should try to explain this book because you're not going to understand it. It has high fae and fairies and fantastical elements and all the things. So if you're interested in reading Little Miss Sarah Janet, then please go check this one out because this book did not disappoint. And then the last 5-star book that I read in February was Bunny by Mona Awad. And I must say, when I first finished reading this, I had no idea what to rank this, and I was kind of mad because it's one of those books that you read and you don't understand what's going on for basically all of it. But then Katie Coulson, whose favorite book is Bunny, did a 2-hour live chat discussion about this because this was their first book club for her book club, obviously because it's her favorite book. And she explained it, and it made so much sense after reading it that I was like so impressed by all that went on in this book that I didn't realize went on that I gave it 5 stars. And I'm gonna need to go back and reread it again and probably rewatch Katie's video before I go back into it. But this was so good. I don't even know how to explain this book. Like, it's just like, I feel like this is the book you would read or you'd write if you were on acid, if I'm being honest. So I don't know. But my favorite book of February did happen to be Crescent City by Sarah J. Maas. I loved it so much. It was such a fun time. I highly recommend it. All right, let's go to March. All right, so in March, I read, 11 books, and I had 7 5-stars. That's a pretty good month so far. The first 5-star I read was And Every Morning the Way Home Gets Longer and Longer by Frederick Bachman. I read this because Katie Coulson said every single person that she has recommended this to has cried. And it did not make me cry, but then again, I don't cry at books. And this book didn't do it, so I don't know if any book ever will. Because this one is literally about an old man and his relationship with his grandchild as he has Alzheimer's and his fate slowly fading away to nothing. And it was extremely sad, but beautiful, and I loved it, and I just think you should read it. That's all I'm going to say. Then the next book that I read 5 stars was Tender is the Flesh by Augustina Basterica. And this is the weirdest book ever about like what a world would be like if animals were no longer able to be eaten because they're toxic to humans and you had to convert to cannibalism and it was legalized. And what would happen if one of you worked at a cannibal like human processing plant and like their perspective. That is what this is about. And this last page was like insane. Can't believe that it happened. I just very much appreciated this and loved this, and I don't know if that makes me weird for like loving this book because it was like very morbid and disturbing, but I had the greatest time with it, and I'm not sad that I enjoyed it. Then we get to one that, yeah, is overrated, but I had the best time with it, and that is The Love Hypothesis by Ali Hazelwood. I know it has its flaws. I know its sex scenes are pretty much awful, but I just really loved this, and I think everybody needs an Adam Carlson in their life, and that's all I'm going to say to this book. It was just fun. It had all the vibes. It was exactly what I needed in the moment, and it was a 5-star. Also going along that same boat is another popular romance artist, and it was People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry. And it was the first Emily Henry book I've read. No, I haven't read Beach Read yet. We'll get to that on another date. But this one was just so fun about Poppy and Alex, two best friends. They go on summer trips all the time. One summer trip breaks them apart, and they go on a summer trip a couple years later and like try to fix what happened between them. Honestly, it was the miscommunication trope at its worst, and I didn't like it for that. But I just loved Poppy and Alex so much that they pushed past that for me to still give it a 5-star. Then we have one of my favorite books of the year, and that is The Push by Ashley Audrain. I loved this book. I love creepy child books. Like, I really do. I don't think there's anything wrong with them. I have the best time with them. And this one was exactly that. About the making and breaking of a family and a woman whose experience to motherhood is nothing at all as she hoped for and everything like she feared. The child in this book was so creepy. I really felt for this mom and the dad just not believing her. I had the best time with it. If you think you can handle that sort of thing, I highly recommend this book. Then I read from Miss Ashley Winstead, which I read 2 books from hers, and for some reason, one of them is not on this list that I'm doing. So I'm going to talk about both of her books right now, because I'm pretty sure I read the other one in February. This one was In My Dreams I Hold a Knife by her, and I had so much fun with this. This is basically one of those not isolated thrillers, reunion thrillers, where there's a group of 5 kids in college. They're all best friends. One of them dies in college. 10 years go by. They're not talking to each other, really. They go back for a reunion, and they find out that the killer is not really who they thought they were, and they're all brought back there to find out who actually did the murder. It is not good in the sense of, like, the story per se. It's all just vibes and gossipy college drama. And I was definitely here for it. Just like I was here for her first romance, which was Fool Me Once, which that one was more a political one, which it got a little too political at times, but I still really enjoyed it. I had so much fun with it. It was really cool that she's able to write thrillers and also romances, and I loved and enjoyed all of them. Both of them, actually. So that was also a 5-star as well. But my favorite book for March, for sure, was The Push by Miss Ashley Audrain. I still highly recommend it. All right, let's move on to April. Before we move on to April, I should also say I did read this in March, and it was Heartstopper Volume 1, and I just love this. If you don't know what it's about by now, it's literally about Nick and Charlie, the cutest couple ever, 2 boys that fall in love in their prep school. And I love it, and it's great, and the pictures are beautiful, and it's everything that I need, and the Netflix adaptation is just as special. So in April, I read 10 books, and 4 out of 10 were 5 stars. And so the first one that I read that was 5 stars is The Risk, which is the Mind F series by S.T. Abbey, book number 1 of 5. I also read the second one, but I didn't give that one 5 stars. I just loved the first one more. The writing is not good. Once again, it's very cringe writing, but the story is what I was there for. And it's just about this girl that basically she was wronged by a bunch of men forever ago, and she is righting her wrongs by becoming a serial killer and killing all of them. And she's also in a relationship with one of the cops that is trying to find her, but doesn't know that he's trying to find her. And it is just the best time ever, and I just loved it. And each book is only about 100 to 150 pages long, so they're super quick to get through. And I need to read the 3rd, 4th, and 5th one so that I can finish the series, because I had such a blast with the first 2. Then I read one of the 3 feminist novellas that Ali Hazelwood came out with this year, named Under One Roof, and that was the only one, I believe, that got a 5-star. I don't remember the exact characters. I don't even remember. I think one of them inherits half of a house of her old professor, because her old professor put her in her will because she loved her so much when she passes, and her grandson gets the other half, and they don't like each other, but they have to, like, live together under one roof. Hence, Under One Roof. And then, of course, a relationship ensues. And I just loved this one so much. However, if I had read all 3 of them in succession, I probably wouldn't have given any of them a 5, because they all have the "he's so big" trope. And that's like all she seems to write about. And it's very aggravating. But since I had only read that one at the time, it didn't bother me just as much yet. Then we get to one that this is probably the only one that has ever actually triggered me as a mom as to date, because of how cruel this mom is to her children, and it was Verity by Colleen Hoover. This lived up to the hype. I loved it so much, but it was very triggering. Like, there is some child cruelty up in here. So if you cannot handle that, especially if you're a mom, then do not read it. And if you're not into sex, because there is a lot of sex scenes in here, like a lot. So if you can't handle reading that, don't read it. But it was good, and I did not expect that ending. And then the last one that I read was Heartstopper Volume 2 because I just had to keep going with this bad boy and it was so fun. Nick and Charlie are just the cutest. Like I said, once again, this Netflix series needs to come out with season 2 coming soon so that I can finish my Heartstopper journey. But of course, my favorite one in April was Verity because literally it made me so shocked and so freaked and so spooked out. It was just crazy. All right, let's move to May. Okay, in May, I read 12 books and 5 out of 12 were 5 stars. And the first 5-star that I read for that month was Know My Name by Chanel Miller. This one was the only memoir that I read this year. And this one is literally about Jane Doe, otherwise known as Chanel Miller, who was the one that was sexually assaulted on Stanford campus by Brock Turner. And it's just her story of all that went on, including the trial and everything. And it was a very hard, very dense read. And I listened to her narrate it in the audiobook, and it made it such a much better experience. But just know it handles some dark content, and it just shows how women really need to fight to, like, be heard in those types of situations because the attacker gets taken more seriously, and it's ridiculous. But it was fantastic. Then we went to, we already know this is going to be my favorite 5-star of this month, and we already know it's going to be my top book of the year. We went to Other People's Clothes by Calla Henkel, and we read this in May. And like I said, I'm not going to explain it again because I say it every day on here. So that's all I'm going to say. It was my favorite of May, and of the year, obviously. Then I went and I read Book Lovers by Emily Henry because that was her new book that came out. And I do wish that this was a hardcover copy, but Book of the Month did not seem to give this as a copy, and I'm sad. But this one is about Nora. She is like a huge books person, and she like has this like, not even, I wouldn't even say it's like an enemies to lovers type book because they're not really enemies. Like they had one like issue. But anyway, it is kind of enemies to lovers, but it's also more of like a sister dynamics book. And I don't know, I just loved it probably because I just do love books so much, and like a lot of it took place in a bookstore and whatnot. It was just a fantastic time. And another book type book that I read was The Roughest Draft. And I had so much fun with this. It was not a very steamy book, but it didn't have to be. It was still just so much fun. And I loved that this one, half of it took place in the Keys where I grew up. Because it's about these two, like this writing duo that wrote a book together, and then they had a falling out and they still have to write one more book together. So a couple years later, they have to get back together and basically stay stuck together in a house until they write it. And you find out why they had a falling out, and some people don't like that reason. I liked it. It was a romance for the books, as it said, and I just genuinely enjoyed this one. I thought it was a great, cute little romance. And then the last 5-star that I had in May was They Never Learn by Lane Fargo. And this is a very much a good for her energy book about an English professor that basically murders students that deserve it. And like the whole story of her potentially getting caught. And it is just so much fun. And it has dual timelines. And I just remember reading this and just having the best time. I read it through super duper fast. It is just good for her all the way through to the very end. Hence why it was my second favorite read that I had for the month. Alright, let's go to June. June, I read 11 books and I had 5 stars. And the first 5-star I had was Hidden Pictures by Jason Recklack. And I know that this book has been confrontational and has had issues. However, I don't think that the way that they used the plot twist was in the way that people are saying that it was used. So I had a great time with it. I read through it super quick. Because this one has a bunch of creepy pictures in it. Like, let me find a creepy picture. That's not a creepy picture. That's one of the only ones that is not creepy. Let's get to like, that one's kind of creepy. So like, this one is about a little kid that starts drawing like super crazy stuff, and his babysitter is trying to figure out like, are they haunted by a ghost or some crap. And I read this in a day, y'all. Like, I had so much fun with this. I read it in a day. It was such a good time. I highly recommend. I also highly recommend, this was my favorite book for sure of June and one of my top 5 of the year, and that was The Children on the Hill by Jennifer McMahon. It is basically a Frankenstein modernized retelling. What she is really good at is creating dual timeline perspectives from like 30 years ago and like now. And like I said, Frankenstein retelling, what's not to love? Frankenstein's one of my favorite classics of all time. And I had so much fun with this. And the twist at the end was crazy, and the end was crazy, and I just loved everything about this book. Then we have my friend's book that they wrote, which I absolutely loved, and that was Monsters Are We by Ren Montgomery. First off, I love this cover. It is just beautiful. I don't know how to explain this without giving it away, but it's about a girl that like her and her husband are not doing well, and then this monster comes in, and it basically has a bunch of fantastical monsters, like vampires and like other ones that I can't dispose of at the moment. But if you like fantastical books about monsters living in plain sight among humans and them not knowing it, then this book would certainly be for you. Then we have the sequel to It Happened One Summer by Tessa Bailey, and we have Hook, Line, and Sinker by Tessa Bailey, which follows her sister and her being best friends with Fox, which is the fisherman's best friend, who is known as a ladies' man, but he also has a soft side, and it's her breaking through his soft side exterior and basically ending up dating him. And I loved this one just as much, and this one has a steamy scene that I will always remember. It was so good. And then the last 5-star that I had in June was How to Fake It in Hollywood by Ava Wilder. I read this in the car on my vacation, my family vacation. I read it over a couple of car rides, and I just really loved this one. Deals with grief. One of them is suffering from the death of a friend, and like they're helping each other through that. And it's like Hollywood like type style. It was a cute little fluffy fun romance, and I'm definitely glad that I read it, and I just had the most fun with it. So if you're looking for like a Hollywood-esque like fake dating type situation that also covers like real life issues, this is a good one for that. And then like I said, my favorite for the month was Children on the Hill. Alright, let's go to July. So in July, I read 14 books and 7 of them were 5 stars. So once again, we had a 50-50 month, a great month for July. And the first book that I read that was 5 stars was Pretty Girls by Karen Slaughter, and I read this for Haley Hughes Book Club because she is obsessed with this book. It's her favorite book ever. And it was one of my first books that dove more into, I guess what I would say, extreme horror, but I wouldn't really call this an extreme horror book. I would just call this a thriller book with some gore. Like a lot of gore. And a lot of like dark stuff, like torture and things. But it was very, very good. It's basically about 2 sisters. It's a sister dynamic story. And one of their sisters was brutally like murdered like 20 years past, and they don't know who did it. And then 20 years later, one of their husbands is killed. And so it's like, how are these things all connected? And like another girl goes missing. And I loved it. I had a great time with it. I was not expecting the twists and turns in this book. And it was definitely everything I expected out of a Karen Slaughter novel. Then we had my favorite book of the month and my second favorite book of the year, and that is Blood Sugar by Sasha Rothschild, which this book was also a Haley Hughes recommendation. She can never recommend me a stray, apparently. And this one is about a murderess that you can't help but root for. It's good for her energy. She basically like doesn't get out of the way with people that are going to probably die if they deserve to die. But she's actually being charged with her husband's murder, and that's the one murder she didn't commit. So how is she going to get out of that? And I just loved following her like mind and like how this was written. It was just written the perfect way for me. I read through this in like a day, and I had the best time with it. Then I also read in that month You Made a Fool of Death with Your Beauty by Akwaeke Emezi. This is the first book that I've ever read by this author, and while I don't particularly love the relationship that was in this, I thought it was hilarious. I thought the writing was beautiful, and I really did enjoy my time with this, so that is why I got 5 stars still. It is just a deep, heartfelt romance novel that also deals with grief, because the main character, the first thing is that her significant other passed away, and she's recovering from that. It was truly beautiful. Then we have when I started to read some like creepy horror books, and we have Sour Candy by Keelan Patrick Burke. This is super short, sweet, to the point, about this guy named Phil and his son Adam, but it's not actually his son. Like he goes to like this shop, and this kid just kind of like latches on to him. Why? Because there's some creepy stuff going on in this book, I might just say. It's literally only like 70 pages long, but it is creepy and does the job. Then we have The Lies I Tell by Julie Clark, and I had never read this before. It was one of the books that I bought for Book of the Month, and I wasn't sure if I was gonna like it or not. I picked it up on a whim, and I had so much fun with this book. It was about a con artist, and it was just, I literally read through this book so fast, and I was not expecting it to. Like, the way that she writes is fantastic. I picked up her other book, The Last Flight, like basically right after finishing this, because I loved this so much. I'm so glad that I read this, and I highly recommend it. Then I also read in that month Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke by Eric LaRocca. This was my first Eric LaRocca experience. It was creepy. I had to know what this book is about, and finally I know what it's about. It's basically about 2 lesbian women that are on a chat site, and one is selling an antique vintage apple peeler, and it goes awry. And that's all I can say, and you will never guess where this book ends. Honestly, you won't, because I was not expecting that. And then the last 5-star for that month was Jar of Hearts by Jennifer Hillier. I read this in an entire day while I was sitting and waiting for a free women's empowerment tattoo. Literally was there all day and finished this book, so you can tell that I loved it if I read it in a day. And it is just a typical thriller about a girl that she was friends with in school, disappeared. The girl ends up finding out that she was like responsible for part of her murder, so she goes to jail. She gets out later, and like death starts happening again, and so it's just like what's going on now, essentially. And this one was wild in its plot twist, but also just so fun. So like I had to rate it 5 stars. And then, like I said, my favorite for July was Blood Sugar by Sasha Rothschild. So let's move to August. In August, I read 9 books and I only had 3 5 stars, so it wasn't as great of a reading month. However, I did get to read Any Man by Amber Tamblyn, and this book is sensational. It basically takes like about girl rapists and girl people that assault men, and it's men victims speaking up through like podcasts and emails and interviews and just like discussing what their thoughts are after being assaulted. And this book was fantastic. The audiobook is sensational. I just loved how, like, I had never heard anything like this before. And, like, I just don't know how to explain it. Like, every page looks different. Like, it's very unique in its writing. And I just loved what it had to say. It is very genre bending for sure. And I loved it. Then we also read the 3rd book that I read by Miss Ashley Winstead this year, The Last Housewife, and I've given all of her books 5 stars. She has solidified herself as a top author of all time for me. And this one is very dark. It's way darker than In My Dreams I Hold a Knife. Like, it's very culty, so if you're not into cults, don't read this. But I had the best time with this book. I thought it was very well crafted. I was not expecting half of these twists. And it has a podcast element, so if you really like podcasts and books, then you might really enjoy this. And then my favorite romance of the year was in this one, and it was Delilah Green Doesn't Care by Ashley Herring Blake, which she just released a new book, and I'm gonna have to go get it soon because, like, why would I not? And that one is about Delilah Green, and she basically gets invited to do photography at like her sister-in-law's wedding, and she has to go back to town where nobody likes her, and she meets Claire, this single mom situation. And they are so cute. It is adorable. It is very steamy, and I loved everything about it, and I can't wait to read the sequel in this one. And honestly, I would say that my favorite book for the month was this Delilah Green one, because it is in my top 10 for this year. I had so much fun with it. On to September. In September, I only read 7 books, and 3 of them were 5 stars. So that was a pretty good month overall. The first one that I read was for Haley Hughes, Queen's Besties Book Club, and it was The Stranger in the Mirror by Liv Constantine. This is not a phenomenal book by any stretch of the imagination. This book literally got a 5 star for all the vibes and how much fun I had reading this book, but it is an amnesia trope book. So if that is not something that you're interested in, I would not recommend it. But it's just about this girl, Addison. She's getting prepared to marry her fiance, but she doesn't know who she really is because a few years ago she was found on the side of the road and she didn't remember anything about her life. Meanwhile, this guy named Julian is trying to figure out what happened to his wife, Cassandra, a few years back, and so you assume that that's his wife, and then it's a little more sinister than like it all appears to be. Had so much fun with this. I don't really remember everything about it, but I still really loved it. Then we had Daisy Darker by Alice Feeney. She is slowly becoming a favorite author of mine too because I read Rock, Paper, Scissors by her last year, and that was also a 5 star. This one is an Agatha Christie and Then There Were None retelling, only completely different twist and take on it. And this is one of the only And Then There Were None retellings that I have fully appreciated and that I loved and that I just had so much fun with. And so I'm not going to say anything other than that. It's basically a family on an isolated island. The Nana ends up dead at the night, and they have to figure out who did it before they keep dropping like flies themselves. And like I said, the twist is crazy. And then the last 5 star book that I read for that month was Creep by Jennifer Hillier. I am slowly getting through all of Jennifer Hillier's books, and I'm having the best time with them, and they have all, except for one, been 5 stars so far. And this one is kind of a stalker one about a professor of psychology. She starts an affair with her undergraduate, and then she ends up stopping it because she's engaged, you know, with like a really good man. But apparently, like, he's like, well, if I can't have you, no one can. And it gets a little scary from there. And I had so much fun with this. I did not expect the ending to this one either. And I can't wait to read the sequel in this one, Freak. I would say my favorite for September was definitely Daisy Darker by Alice Feeney. On to October. Okay, in October, I only read 8 books and 6 of them were 5 stars. But I don't like to call that as one of my better months because that was when I was having a really big reading slump. So like, I don't know. But the first 5 star of that month was Ring Shout by P. Jelly Clark. It is a KKK, like, fantastical horror novel. And I don't want to say more than that, but it's really short, really sweet and to the point. The audiobook is fantastic. There's like spiritual hymns and singing in it. Go get it. It was a great time. Then I read my first extreme horror of the whole entire time, and that was Cirque Berserk by Jessica Guess. It is just a typical, like, carnival slasher, basically. And it was so good. There was a twist in the beginning that had me shooketh, and it really set it up well for the rest of it. And I loved the ending of it, and it was everything that I wanted in a little mini slasher novel. So I highly recommend. I then went a little bit further in my extreme horror and I read For the Sake of and For the Sake of Two by Judith Sonnet. They both were 5 stars. They are the creepiest, scariest books that I've ever read. They still haunt me to this day. I do not recommend them to the faint of heart. If you are not an extreme horror, torture, scary, like bloody, gory type person, then please don't read these because you are going to be very offended by them. I'm just warning you now. Then I also read The Weight of Blood by Miss Tiffany D. Jackson. It is the first and only book that I have read of hers. It is a Carrie retelling, and it is fabulous. I love how she changed it around with it being a black character that's being bullied and just all of the stuff that she changed. And it has a podcast element in it. Like I said, I really love a good podcast element in a book. I thought she changed it enough that it wasn't exactly the same, but then enough of it was the same that it really was a retelling. And it was just beautifully crafted, and I cannot wait to read more from this author. And then the last 5-star that I had was The Mother Next Door by Tara Laskowski. This is very much a socialite, mommy drama, rich people type book. And that is why I got 5 stars, because of all the vibes. I love rich domestic housewives drama. I just live for that sort of thing. And it took place around Halloween, which made it even better. Like, I just loved the setting. I loved the vibes. I loved everything. I do not remember all that happened in this book. However, I was there for the ride and the journey. And if I had to pick a favorite book from October, it would most certainly be The Weight of Blood by Tiffany D. Jackson. On to November. In November, I only read 3 books, and only one was 5 stars. So it's pretty safe to say this is the book that I picked for November, and that was A Flicker in the Dark by Stacey Willingham. I had this on my 5-star predictions list, and so I had to finally read it to make sure that I actually did think it was 5 stars, and it was. It is about a girl whose dad goes to jail for murdering 5 women, and then 20 years later, it's happening all over again, and she's wondering, did her dad actually do it, or did they put the wrong person in jail? And it is creepy, and I thought that I knew what was happening halfway through, and I got it wrong. And then I thought I knew what was happening 75% of the way through, and I got it wrong again. So she definitely gives you red herrings for sure, and it was so good, and I can't believe this was a debut, and I can't wait to read her next novel, All the Dangerous Things. And then as for December, I have not read any 5-star books in December yet, but I've only read 2 books. However, I'm in the middle of like 7 or 8. So, you know, that's all I'm going to put it at. But with that being said, we go for a total of, we have a total of 51 books that I read that were 5 stars this year, which is crazy. That is literally like half of my reading, and I'm so happy with that. October was technically my best month. However, I would also say that the month, I believe it was July, when I read 14 books was also good because it was 7 out of 14. My worst month was for sure November because I only read 3 books and only one was a 5-star. And then also August, where I only read 3 out of 9. And then my favorite books were ones like Flicker in the Dark, The Weight of Blood, Other People's Clothes, Delilah Green Doesn't Care, Crescent City, Daisy Darker, Jade City. I had so much fun with a lot of these books. I'm very glad that I'm really enjoying my reading this year. And with that, I will let you go for day 7 of Vlogmas, which is going to be a surprise because it was supposed to be a vlog and it's not going to be ready by tomorrow. So I'm going to shift some things around and you'll find out tomorrow what day 7 is going to be. But I will see you in tomorrow's video.